Narrator. In the vast, unforgiving tapestry of the Imperium of man, where 1,000,000 worlds cry out in the name of the God Emperor, some threads shine brighter than others. They are the legends, the bulwarks against the encroaching dark. Among them, the name of the White Sentinels was etched in adamantium and honor. For 10,000 years they had been the Emperor's wrath, made manifest a brotherhood forged in the fires of loyalty and tempered by the crucible of sacrifice. Theirs was a history written in the blood of traitors, the ichor of Xenos, and the ashes of worlds purged in righteous flame. On the storm-racked sentinel world of Chthon, poised on the very edge of the Segmentum Pacificus, their fortress monastery stood defiant. It was named the Aegis of Hope, a bastion of granite and faith against a tide of unending night. Its spires clawed at a sky perpetually bruised with violet and grey, its walls scarred by millennia of siege and orbital bombardment. Within its hallowed halls the air was thick with the scent of sacred incense and machine oil, a symphony of chanted litanies and the rhythmic cadence of armored boots on stone. Every banner told a story of a campaign won, every reliquary held the bones of a hero who had paid the ultimate price. At the heart of this fortress, and at the soul of the chapter, was Master Theron Tyrannus. He was the embodiment of the Adeptus Astartes ideal, a figure seemingly carved from the same stone as the Aegis itself. Encased in master-crafted Terminator armor, his face weathered, and stern was a roadmap of countless battles. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, held no warmth, only the cold, hard light of duty. To his men, he was more than a commander. He was the living will of their Primarch, the anchor of their unwavering faith. His loyalty to the Golden Throne was absolute, a conviction as solid and unyielding as the galactic core. Yet even in this bastion of faith shadows could fall. They often arrived in the form of a black and gold inquisitorial cutter, a sliver of judgment in the turbulent skies of Chthon. From it would disembark Inquisitor Caelan Valerius of the Ordo Hereticus, a man whose soul was a fortress of a different kind, one built of paranoia and suspicion. Valerius was gaunt, his face, a pale mask from which dark eyes burned with zealous fire. He saw the potential for heresy in every shadow, in every unspoken word. The strategic chamber, high in the central spire, was a space of stark functionality. A vast hololithic projector dominated the center, casting a shimmering three-dimensional map of the surrounding star systems. Chapter Master Theron stood before it, his gauntleted hands clasped behind his back, studying the ebb and flow of reported enemy movements. The massive doors hissed open, admitting the Inquisitor. Two hulking Astartes guards in bone-white armor flanked the entrance, their bolters held at a respectful low ready. Inquisitor Valerius Theron's voice was a low rumble, acknowledging the presence without turning. Your arrival was unannounced. The storms in the outer system are treacherous. The Emperor's work does not wait for calm weather. Chapter Master Valerius replied, his voice thin and sharp as a shard of glass. He glided into the room, his long leather coat sweeping behind him, the rosette of his office gleaming on his collar. I trust your vigil has been uneventful. Theron finally turned, his immense form dwarfing the Inquisitor. The enemies of mankind are never idle. We have tracked Orc scout vessels near the Phobian Drift and repelled a Corsair raid on an outlying listening post. Chthon remains secure. Valerius circled the hololith, his gaze lingering not on the tactical display, but on the chapter master himself. Security is an illusion, Theron. A comforting lie we tell ourselves between betrayals. It is the unseen enemy, the rot within, that is the gravest threat. Tell me how fares the spirit of your men. Is their faith as strong as their armor? The question was a probe, a test. Theron's expression did not change, but a subtle tension entered the room. My warriors are Astartes. Their faith is forged in the heat of battle and guided by the light of the Astronomicon. They swore an oath to the Emperor, and they would die before breaking it. Oaths Valerius mused, a faint, humorless smile touching his lips. Even the arch-traitor Horus swore an oath once. Loyalty is not a static state, Chapter Master. It must be tested, proven, and purified. Constantly. Theron stepped away from the projector, his movement slow and deliberate. And it is my duty to lead them in battle, to be the Emperor's instrument of war. It is your duty to hunt the shadows. Our paths serve the same, Master Inquisitor, but they are not the same. Do not mistake my warrior's honor for naivety. The air crackled with unspoken friction. It was a conflict as old as the Imperium itself, the warrior's code clashing with the spy's paranoia. Theron saw a galaxy to be defended, souls to be shielded. Valerius saw a galaxy to be purged, heresy to be scoured with fire, no matter the cost. It was a respectful tension, for now born of the immense power each man wielded. But in the fragile balance of their duties, in the chasm between the warrior's honor and the zealot's suspicion, the first imperceptible crack began to form in the foundation of the White Sentinel's world. A crack that, given the right pressure, would shatter their universe completely. The hololithic display in the strategium of the battle barge Argent Blade bathed the chamber in a cold blue light. It depicted the world of Viridia Prime, a densely populated hive world shimmering like a jewel in the void. But beneath its clouds of industry and city lights, a cancer was growing. Red icons pulsed across the planet's surface, indicating the suspected locus points of a Genestealer cult infestation. Chapter Master Theron stood with his senior captains, their white and silver power armor a stark contrast to the shadowy room. The initial scans confirm a biosignature consistent with a third-generation hybrid infestation, reported Captain Lysander of the Second Company, his face grim. It is centered on the lower levels of Hive Primus, but tendrils have spread to the Manufactorum districts. The planetary governor remains silent. He is either compromised or dead. The Astra Militarum regiments stationed there are reporting mass civil unrest, which they are attributing to food riots, added Captain Valerius of the Fifth. No relation to the Inquisitor, a fact that brought the captain no end of irritation. They are blind to the true threat. Theron nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the Hive City. A surgical strike. We deploy the First and Third Companies via drop pod assault directly into the Patriarch's suspected lair beneath the spire. The 5th and 7th will secure the perimeter and cut off all escape routes. We will sever the head of the serpent before it can rally its brood. It was a classic Codex-approved strategy. Precise, overwhelming force applied to the critical point. It would be costly, but it would save the planet and its 30 billion inhabitants from the insidious slavery of the Xenos. As the captains began issuing preliminary orders, a strident alarm cut through the calm of the strategium. A priority astropathic seal flashed on the main screen, immediately overridden by an encrypted Vox channel. The sigil of the Holy Ordos of the Inquisition burned into view. Cease all deployment preparations. The voice of Inquisitor Caelan Valerius crackled through the speakers, laced with static and absolute authority. His face appeared on a secondary screen, stark and unforgiving. By my authority as an agent of the Ordo Hereticus, I am assuming command of this operation. The world of Viridia Prime has been declared perdita. The taint is absolute. A chilling silence fell over the command deck. Theron stepped forward, his voice a low growl. Inquisitor, your assessment is premature. Our intelligence indicates the cult is still consolidating its power. The population can be saved. Can be, or you believe it can be. Valerius retorted. You see a military problem to be solved. Chapter Master, I see a spiritual contagion that has already damned every soul on that wretched rock. We cannot risk a single hybrid escaping this system. The fleet is to withdraw to the Mandeville Point and prepare to enact the final sanction. You will witness my judgment, and then you will depart. The order was unmistakable. Exterminatus. To burn the atmosphere, boil the seas, and reduce 30 billion souls to dust and ash to ensure the death of thousands of monsters. I will not, Theron stated. The words were quiet, yet they shook the strategium to its core. I will not condemn a world of loyal imperial citizens to annihilation on the basis of your paranoia. The Codex Astartes dictates our purpose is to protect humanity, not to be its executioner. The Inquisitor's face contorted into a mask of fury. The Codex will not protect you from a charge of insubordination, Theron. This is not a request. It is a command under the seal of the High Lords of Terra. Defy it, and you will be declared traitor. The transmission cut out, leaving only the humming of the ship's systems and the simmering rage in the room. The choice had been laid bare: obey a monstrous order and betray their purpose, or uphold their honor and commit high treason. Theron Tyrannus turned to his captains. His face was set like granite. We are the White Sentinels. We do not burn worlds while a single innocent soul might yet draw breath. We will descend and cut out the cancer as we have sworn. The Inquisitor can issue his threats. We will answer with our deeds. There was no hesitation. On the command deck, a chorus of "For the Emperor" was the only answer he needed. Hours later, the belly of the Argent Blade roared with the fire of industry and war. Drop pods were armed, thunderhawks fueled, and bolters sanctified with oils and prayer. Theron's voice broadcast across every Vox channel in the fleet, a calming storm in the heart of the tempest. Brothers, an agent of the Imperium has commanded us to abandon our most sacred duty. He would have us stand aside while a world of the faithful is consumed by fire out of fear and doubt. But we are Astartes. We do not know fear, and we do not suffer doubt. Our faith is in the Emperor, and our duty is to mankind. For the billions of souls crying out from the planet below, we will be their salvation. For the honor of our chapter, we will not fail. Courage and honor. The response was a deafening roar from 10,000 throats. The assault began. Drop pods screamed through the polluted atmosphere of Viridia Prime metal meteors carrying angels of death. They slammed into the corroded plazas and ferrocrete structures of Hive Primus, and from them poured the white and silver tide of the Sentinels. The battle was immediate and horrific. A tide of chitinous bodies of creatures that were once human surged to meet them, their minds enslaved to the great devourer. Bolter fire echoed in the cavernous underhive, each explosion a punctuation mark in a litany of death. Chainswords roared to life, biting through flesh and bone. The fighting was brutal close-quarters combat against a foe that felt no pain, only the overriding instinct to kill. The Sentinels paid for every meter of ground with blood and ammunition. Theron himself, clad in his revered Terminator armor, was at the forefront of the assault on the Patriarch's lair. He and his First Company veterans smashed through the monstrous Royal Guard, his thunderhammer crushing carapaces and skulls with every swing. They finally breached the central chamber, a horrific cathedral of glistening biomass, where the Patriarch, a monstrous psychic beast of immense size and power, awaited them. The psychic scream of the creature could shatter mortal minds, but it broke against the iron will of the Astartes. The final battle was a maelstrom of violence. Theron, ignoring grievous wounds, finally crushed the creature's massive skull with a final desperate blow. As the Patriarch died, a wave of psychic feedback washed over the planet. The Genestealer horde, their guiding intelligence extinguished, fell into confusion and disarray. The battle was won. Standing in the reeking chamber of the dead Xenos, his armor dented and stained, Theron looked out over a city that, though scarred and bleeding, was still alive. They had suffered grievous losses, brave brothers, whose names would be added to the rolls of honor. But they had saved 30 billion souls. It was a victory, a glorious, hard-won victory. But as the Argent Blade established a low orbit over the pacified world, Theron Tyrannus knew with a cold certainty that Inquisitor Valerius would not see it that way. He had disobeyed. He had saved a world, but in doing so, he had damned his chapter. Aboard his sleek black cruiser, the divine Writ Inquisitor Kalen Valerius paced his private scriptorium. The chamber was lit by the ghostly green glow of data slates and flickering elector candles. His fury had subsided, replaced by something far colder and more dangerous righteous certainty. He was not merely punishing insubordination, he was cauterizing a wound before it turned septic. He stood before a servo-scribe, a mindless skull-faced automaton that dutifully transcribed his every word into a high-level report destined for the highest echelons of the Inquisition on Terra. Report log Ordo Hereticus date cipher Gamma 9. He began, his voice a venomous whisper. Subject chapter: Master Theron Tyrannus and the Astartes. Chapter designated White Sentinels. Regarding the Viridia Prime incident, my direct order for Exterminatus, an order deemed necessary due to the planet-wide depth of the Xenos contagion, was met with open and hostile defiance. He paused, choosing his next words with the precision of a master poisoner. Tyrannus displayed an uncharacteristic and deeply troubling reluctance to purge the alien presence. He spoke of saving the populace with a sentimentality ill-befitting a warrior of the Adeptus Astartes. His subsequent surgical strike, conducted against my explicit command, was not a model of tactical efficiency, but a reckless gamble that exposed the entire sub-sector to potential contamination. He did not seek to destroy the Xenos, but to parley with it on the battlefield to understand its foul heart. It was a masterful lie woven around a core of truth. He didn't need to invent evidence, he only needed to reframe it to paint honor as arrogance and mercy as incipient heresy. Furthermore, he continued, his voice dropping, the losses sustained by the White Sentinels were staggering. Such casualties suggest a chapter whose combat prowess and perhaps its spiritual purity has been compromised. They fought not with the righteous fury of the Emperor's angels, but with a desperate desire to protect the very hive that harbored the alien. I cannot discount the possibility that their long vigil on the galactic rim has exposed them to corrupting influences. I therefore formally accuse the White Sentinels from its chapter master to the lowest neophyte of dereliction of duty, willful insubordination, and potential Xenos sympathism. I request immediate sanction and a full investigation by the Ordos. The cancer must be excised. Valerius ends. The servo-scribe clicked one final time, and the coded message was handed to a waiting astropath, a shrouded figure who would hurl the poison across the galaxy into the heart of the Imperium. Aboard the Argent Blade, a different kind of quiet had descended. Weeks turned into a month. Theron's own reports, meticulously detailed and citing every relevant passage of the Codex Astartes to justify his actions, had been sent. But the vastness of space answered with nothing but a dreadful, suffocating silence. In the astropathic choir, the telepaths strained their minds raw from reaching across the immeasurable gulfs to their counterparts on sector command worlds and even to Terra itself. It is like screaming into a void that has been sealed with lead, the choir's master reported to Theron, his eyes milky and bloodshot from the effort. Our signals are sent, but they are not received. Or if they are received, they are not acknowledged. It is a deliberate shunning, my lord. We are being isolated. The physical proof came soon after. The fleet's supply levels were running low after the costly campaign. A fleet of munitions freighters and supply barges scheduled for rendezvous weeks ago finally appeared on long-range augers. A collective sigh of relief went through the command staff, but as the freighters approached the edge of the system, they slowed, and then one by one their engine flares shifted as they performed a hard burn, turning their backs on the White Sentinels and jumping back into the warp. No hail was answered, no explanation was given. The message was as clear as a cyclonic torpedo detonation. They were alone, pariahs. Far away in the ancient Gothic spires of the Imperial Palace on Terra, the fate of the White Sentinels was not being decided in a grand trial with evidence and testimony. It was a footnote in a daily summary for a subcommittee of the Adeptus Terra. In a chamber of shadow and carved stone, faceless scribes and minor lords moved parchments around a vast oak table. Valerius's report lay at the top of a pile, its inquisitorial seal demanding immediate attention. "The charge is severe," one shadowy figure intoned, his voice dry as dust. "But the source is impeccable," another countered. "An inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus does not make such accusations lightly. To question his word is to question the Ordos themselves, a chapter of the Adeptus Astartes." The first voice began, a hint of caution in his tone. "A chapter on the fringe," the second interrupted dismissively. "One of many. Their history is commendable but not essential. The word of Valerius speaks of contagion. The risk, however small, of a rogue Astartes chapter turning against the Imperium is unacceptable. The High Lords will not tolerate it, not with the Cadian Gate under pressure, and a dozen other crises requiring their attention." There was no debate, no call for corroborating evidence. It was a matter of political expediency and risk management. An inquisitor's paranoia outweighed a chapter's 10,000 years of loyal service. "The verdict is clear," then a third, final voice concluded. "Accept Inquisitor Valerius's recommendation. The taint must be purged. Have the decree drawn up. Issue the Excommunicate Traitoris." A scribe, his face hidden by a deep cowl, took the parchment. He walked to a small alcove where a great iron seal hung suspended in a complex gimbal. With a grunt of effort, he swung the device over and brought it down upon a fresh sheet of vellum, impressing it with the final irrevocable judgment of the Imperium. The sound echoed in the silent chamber like a cell door slamming shut, a sound that would not be heard by the condemned until it was far, far too late. 2 months after the victory at Viridia Prime, the White Sentinel's fleet had returned to its home world of Kithon. An uneasy quiet had settled over the chapter. They went through their rituals of prayer, maintenance, and training, but an undercurrent of tension pervaded every action. They were isolated, shunned, and the silence from the wider Imperium was a heavier burden than any physical foe. The Argent Blade hung in high anchor over the Aegis of Hope, a silent guardian waiting for a judgment that was terrifyingly slow to arrive. Then it came, not as a request for explanation or a summons to a trial, but as a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. A single brutally encrypted message of the highest possible priority sliced through the communications blackout. It bore the unforgeable ciphers of the Adeptus Ministorum, broadcast from the holy world of Ophelia Sephund on behalf of the High Lords of Terror. A flicker of hope ignited in the hearts of some. Perhaps this was it, their chance to be heard. On the command bridge of the Argent Blade, Theron Tyrannus stood before the central command throne as the message was decrypted. The process was agonizingly slow, each layer of code stripped away like flesh from a bone. Finally, the Mastervox Servitor, a grotesque fusion of man and machine, crackled to life. Its voice was not human. It was a synthesized, dispassionate monotone, devoid of pity or inflection, designed to convey information with absolute clarity. It was the voice of bureaucratic annihilation. "Let it be known to all loyal subjects of the Imperium," the voice began, its cold tone echoing in the suddenly tomb-like silence of the bridge. "In the sacred and terrible name of the God Emperor of mankind, and by the authority vested in the High Lords of Terror, this decree is final and absolute." Every officer on the bridge froze, their blood turning to ice. The Space Marine chapter, heretofore known as the White Sentinels, its master, Theron Tyrannus, its captains, its warriors, its fleet, and all its holdings are hereby and forthwith declared Excommunicate Traitoris. The term hit the bridge like a physical blow. It was the ultimate condemnation, a word that meant more than death. It meant damnation. The servitor continued, its voice a relentless drone of judgment. For the unforgivable crimes of gross insubordination against a holy agent of the Inquisition, of willingly and knowingly ignoring a direct command to enact exterminatus upon a tainted world, and of thereby consorting with and giving succor to the alien menace, they are stripped of all honor title and standing within the Imperium of man. Their names shall be struck from every record. Their banners shall be burned. Their fortresses shall be cast down. Their souls are declared forfeit to the Emperor's judgment. No aid shall be given to them. No plea shall be heard. No mercy shall be shown. All servants of the throne are hereby commanded to hunt down and destroy these traitors with extreme prejudice. Suffer not the traitor to live. The judgment of terror has been spoken. The sentence is death. The message ended. A deafening silence followed, filled only by the low hum of the plasma reactors. The men on the bridge stared in stunned disbelief, their faces masks of horror and incomprehension. 10,000 years of loyalty undone by a single broadcast. The spell was broken by a frantic cry from the master of the augurs. My Lord Tactical Display IFF transponders. Theron's gaze snapped to the hololithic map of the Chthon system. The friendly green icons of the Imperial Navy's 3rd Pacification Fleet, which had been stationed in the system for years, were flickering. One by one, they turned a blood red. They were no longer allies. They were hostiles. Across the screen, energy signatures flared to life as their weapon batteries powered up and their lance turrets turned to face the Sentinel's fleet. Simultaneously, the surface-to-ship Vox channels erupted in a cacophony of confused and panicked voices from the planet below. This is Sergeant Gratus 23rd Chthonian Dragoons to Aegis Command. We are receiving a priority 1 directive. It says, by the throne, it says, you are declared traitor. Orders are to open fire on your positions. What is happening? Before Aegis Command could even respond, the betrayal was made manifest. A brilliant, blindingly white beam of energy erupted from the dorsal spine of the Imperial Navy cruiser Emperor's Scorn. It crossed the void in an instant and struck the highest spire of the Aegis of Hope, the Spire of Remembrance, which housed the names of every white sentinel who had ever fallen in service to the Emperor. The ancient stone vaporized. 10 millennia of honor, of sacrifice, of loyalty were turned into molten slag and scattered atoms in a single hateful moment. The war had begun. They had not been asked for their side. They had not been put on trial. They had simply been condemned. They were no longer the guardians of Chthon, the heroes of Viridia Prime, the Emperor's chosen. They were the enemy. And their allies, their comrades in arms, were now their executioners. The Aegis of Hope shuddered under the relentless orbital bombardment. Explosions rocked the foundations of the fortress monastery, shaking loose dust that had lain undisturbed for 1,000 years. Deep within the rock-crete heart of the fortress in the Reclusium, now lit by emergency power runes, Chapter Master Theron had gathered what remained of his command council. His captains, their immaculate armor now coated in the grime of battle, were a portrait of shattered brotherhood. The air was thick with the dust of their crumbling home and the acrid smoke of their burning honor. Shock had given way to a volatile storm of emotions. Fury warred with disbelief. Profound grief wrestled with a burning desire for action. "We must lay down our arms!" cried Chief Chaplain Origin, his voice cracking with anguish. His skull-helmed mask was removed, revealing a face etched with a pain deeper than any physical wound. "This is a monstrous error, a blasphemous lie, but to return fire upon the Imperial Navy upon our brother Astartes should they come, that is a sin from which there can be no redemption. We must submit. We must trust that the Emperor's light will eventually reveal the truth." Captain Valerius of the 5th slammed a gauntleted fist onto the stone altar they were using as a table. "Truth," he roared. "They declared us traitor without trial. They rain fire upon our fortress without asking a single question. They hunt us as rabid dogs. There is no truth to be found in the weapons lock of a compliance ship. Chaplain surrender is suicide. We will be executed and our genocide will be destroyed. Is that the end you wish for 10 millennia of service?" The council erupted. Captains who had fought shoulder to shoulder for centuries were now at each other's throats. The purists led by Origin pleaded for faith and submission, believing that to fight back was to truly become the traitors they were accused of being. The pragmatists led by Valerius and the grizzled Captain Lysander argued that their only duty now was to their brothers to survival. "Our honor is all we have left," one captain shouted. "And what honor is there in allowing our entire chapter to be annihilated for a crime we did not commit?" Lysander shot back, his voice a low growl. "We are warriors. We will die on our feet, not in chains." Theron Tyrannus remained silent, through it all a statue of cold fury. Every word tore at his soul. His entire existence had been defined by a single, simple truth: loyalty to the Emperor. The thought of raising a weapon against a vessel bearing the Imperial Aquila was a physical sickness. Yet the faces of his warriors, his sons, looked to him. They were being slaughtered. Their home was being reduced to rubble. To surrender them to the cold, bureaucratic machine that had so unjustly condemned them felt like the ultimate betrayal. His oath to the Emperor was at war with his duty to his men. Finally, he raised a hand. Silence fell heavy and absolute. Chaplain Origen Theron's voice was heavy like a tombstone grinding over another. "Your faith is a credit to our chapter. But the Emperor's light on terror has been obscured by the machinations of lesser men. They have already passed their judgment." He turned his gaze to the warrior captains. "And you are right. We will not be led to the abattoir like groks. We have been condemned as traitors. If we are to die, we will die as white sentinels." The decision was made. Not for rebellion, not for vengeance, but for survival. The weight of that decision settled upon them all, and it led to a ceremony more painful than any funeral rite. In the Hall of Oaths, a place that had once rung with the proud declarations of loyalty, the chaplains now performed their most terrible duty. Before them hung the chapter's grand standard, a magnificent tapestry that had been carried to 1,000 war zones. On it, the silver eagle of the White Sentinels was proudly displayed within the wings of the golden Imperial Aquila. With tears streaming unashamedly down his face, Chaplain Origen took up a ceremonial obsidian knife. His hands trembled. This blade was meant for the ritual slaying of alien tyrants, not for this. He hesitated, looking at Theron, his eyes pleading for another way. Theron gave a single solemn nod. With a choked sob, Origen pressed the blade to the ancient fabric. The sound of the priceless silk and gold thread tearing was a scream that echoed louder than the orbital bombardment still raging outside. He did not slash or defile. He painstakingly ritually cut the threads that bound their symbol to the Emperor's. The silver eagle was severed from the golden one. It was a symbolic declaration. They were no longer one. The oath was broken. Their bond was undone. Other chaplains moved through the hall, their movements heavy with grief. They took down the sacred texts gifted from the ecclesiarchy and wrapped them in funereal black cloth. Relics bearing the personal seal of Guilliman of Dawn, recovered at great cost, were gently placed into stasis vaults, their holiness now a painful memory of a bond that no longer existed. They were not destroying their past, but burying it. They were no longer the favored sons of the Imperium. They were orphans cast out into a darkness of their own, with the echoes of a torn oath screaming in their souls. The initial bombardment from the Imperial Navy was a blunt, brutal assault. But Theron and his warriors were Astartes masters of siegecraft, and the Aegis of Hope was one of the most formidable fortresses on the eastern fringe. They held their ground, their own lance batteries returning fire, crippling navy ships that were not designed to fight a stationary target of such power. For a time, a bitter stalemate held in the void above Kethon. Then the true storm arrived. Ripping through reality in a series of violent non-Euclidean translations, a new fleet emerged from the warp. These were not the utilitarian vessels of the Imperial Navy. They were Gothic cathedrals of war, their prows armored in black iron and adorned with massive chained crusader seals. Their hulls were scarred with the honors of 1,000 campaigns fought in the Emperor's name. It was the fleet of the Black Templars. Aboard the bridge of their flagship, the eternal crusader Marshal Valerius, a grim irony of name, stood cloaked in the robes of his station over his ebon armor. He read the astropathic decree of Excommunicate Traitoris with a grim finality. There was no room for doubt or interpretation in his mind. The High Lords had spoken. An Inquisitor had borne witness. That was enough. The judgment is passed. His voice boomed across the bridge, devoid of any emotion save for a cold, hard piety. These white sentinels have forsaken their oaths and turned from the Emperor's light. We are his wrath. We will be the iron storm that scours them from existence. Launch the assault. Grant them the Emperor's peace. The Black Templars' assault was not a bombardment. It was an invasion. Boarding torpedoes and drop pods, all painted in the stark black and white of their zealous chapter, streaked towards the aegis of hope. They slammed into the fortress's bastions and walls with suicidal ferocity, disgorging waves of chainsword-wielding Astartes who roared litanies of hate and purgation. The battle that followed was the ultimate tragedy of the 41st Millennium brother against brother. The White Sentinels, with their intimate knowledge of every corridor, every hidden turret, every choke point, exacted a terrible toll. They fought with the cold, desperate fury of the betrayed. But the Black Templars came on in an unstoppable tide, their faith a weapon as potent as their bolters. The fighting was a brutal, grinding cacophony of ceramite striking ceramite. In the Grand Armory, a sentinel apothecary who had once sworn to preserve Astartes' life was forced to plunge his Narthesium gauntlet into the chest of a Templar, not to retrieve genocide, but to stop his heart. In the Chapel of Heroes, a Templar neophyte, his eyes wide with zealous fire, was cut down by a Sentinel veteran who had stood guard in that same chapel for 3 centuries. There was no glory, only a sickening, intimate butchery. Power fists that had crushed orc skulls now shattered helmets bearing the Imperial cross. Chainswords that had dismembered Xeno's horrors now bit into armor that bore the names of honored warriors. A sentinel sergeant, seeing the Templars' crusade seal on an approaching warrior's shoulder, hesitated for a fraction of a second, a flicker of shared history of a common cause, and was killed for it, a bolter round exploding his chest. The Vox channels were a hellish mix of tactical orders, litanies of faith, and the pained screams of dying demigods. For the Emperor, the Templars roared as they charged. Courage and honor, the Sentinels cried as they met them. The same Emperor, the same purpose now turned them into mortal enemies in a civil war fought in the halls of their own home. High on the command spire, watching the tactical readouts bleed red with casualty reports, Theron Tyrannus felt his heart constrict. They were holding, but they were bleeding out. For every Templar they killed, 2 more seemed to take his place. The Navy's bombardment was intensifying, and the fortress's void shields were beginning to fail. The Aegis of Hope was no longer a shield. It was rapidly becoming a tomb. To stay and fight was to ensure their utter annihilation. His voice when he gave the order was hoarse-broken. All commands hear me. All commands. Execute Evacuation Protocol Omega. The Aegis is lost. I repeat, the Aegis is lost. All surviving forces are to fall back to the lowest embarkation points. We are abandoning our home. The command sent a shockwave of despair through the surviving sentinels, but they obeyed without question. It was a disciplined fighting retreat. Small squads held vital corridors for as long as possible before falling back, selling their lives to buy minutes for their brothers. In the cavernous spaceports deep beneath the mountain, Thunderhawks and Storm Ravens landed amidst the chaos, their ramps dropping to receive the wounded and the last remnants of the chapter's fighting force. The fleet in orbit provided what covering fire it could. The Argent Blade placed itself between the evacuating transports and the vengeful guns of the Imperial fleet, its ancient hull enduring a punishment that would have vaporized lesser vessels. Lances seared its armor, and macro cannon shells exploded against its failing shields. As the last transport cleared the atmosphere, Theron stood on the battered bridge of his flagship and took one last look at Chthon. He saw the smoke rising from his burning home, the home his chapter had defended for 10,000 years. He saw the black ships of his brothers, the Astartes, swarming over it like carrion birds. With a final silent prayer for the fallen, he gave the order. Navigator, plot a course, anywhere but here. Take us into the storm. The remaining ships of the White Sentinel's fleet, battered, burning, and broken, turned their backs on their world. Geller fields flickering to life, they plunged into the insane, chaotic tides of the warp, not as proud warriors of the Imperium, but as hunted fugitives. They had survived, but they had lost everything that had ever defined them. The Imperium was no longer a highway, but a howling tempest. Without the guidance of the Astronomicon, which now shone as a hateful star in their psychic senses, and with their navigator houses either slain or refusing to serve traitors, their jumps through the warp were a series of short, violent, and desperate affairs. The Geller fields of their battered ships flickered and groaned, barely holding the madness of the Empyrean at bay. Whispers slithered through the bulkheads, and sanity was a resource as precious as fuel. The White Sentinels, what was left of them, were a ghost fleet. Of the dozen capital ships and escorts that had once patrolled the Chthon sector, only 3 remained: the heavily damaged battle barge Argent Blade, the strike cruiser Honor's Fist, which was venting plasma from a dozen hull breaches, and a single Gladius-class frigate, the Swift Vengeance. They were adrift in the silent, uncaring void of forgotten systems, hiding in the shadows of dead worlds and the swirling dust of unrecorded nebulae. On the bridge of the Argent Blade, the grandeur was gone. The polished stone was cracked, the gold leaf trim was blackened by fire, and the air hummed with the strained thrum of an overloaded power core. Servitors worked tirelessly patching ruptured conduits, their flesh components weeping lubricants and blood. Theron stood before the forward viewport not as a proud commander, but as a warden of a floating prison. Status report, he commanded, his voice flat. Chief Techmarine Lycurgus, his red armor scorched and his augmetic eye glowing a dull crimson, stepped forward. The blade's spinal superstructure is fractured, Lord Master. One more direct hit and she will break apart. The Honor's Fist has sealed its worst breaches, but its starboard engine is offline. We are salvaging the Vengeance for parts to keep the other 2 flying. We have enough fuel for 2, maybe 3 more short jumps. Our ammunition reserves are at 17%. The water recyclers are failing. He paused, the whirring of his bionics the only sound. We are dying out here, Lord. Theron stared out at the starfield. As long as one of us still draws breath, we are not dead, Lycurgus. We endure. But endurance had a horrific cost, one paid not just in fuel and steel, but in flesh and spirit. The heart of this new, grim reality was in the Apothecarian. The Medici Bay, once a place of healing and restoration, had become a charnel house and a bank of dwindling genetic currency. Chief Apothecary Zale stood over 2 plinths. On them lay battle brothers Marius and Gideon, both heroes of the rearguard action at the Aegis's main gate. Both were catastrophically wounded, their bodies shattered by Templar chainswords. Their armor had been cut away, revealing the mangled ruin of their transhuman physiology. Both were dying. Zale's diagnostic tools confirmed the brutal truth. He had enough stabilizing agents and biofoam to save one of them, not both. His training, his oath, his very being screamed at him to try and save both, but he knew it would mean losing them both. The decision he had to make was no longer simply about saving a life. It was about the future of the chapter. Their genocide, the source of their immortality as a brotherhood, was almost entirely gone, left behind in the frozen vaults of their lost fortress. The progenoid glands, the organs that produced and stored the genocide within these fallen brothers, were their only remaining hope. He scanned their biological readouts. Marius's organs were too damaged, the shock to his system too great. His genocide was likely corrupted. Gideon's, however, was still viable, his body fighting a losing but valiant battle. The calculus was as simple as it was monstrous. Zale bowed his head for a moment, whispering the prayer for the lost. Then, with a steady hand, he picked up a syringe filled with a powerful sedative. He walked to Marius's side. The wounded Astartes' eyes fluttered open, hazy with pain. Did we hold? He whispered, his voice a wet rattle. You held, Brother Zale said softly, his own voice thick with an emotion he could not afford to show. You saved us all. He gently administered the injection. "The Emperor protects. The Emperor!" Marius's voice faded as his eyes closed for the last time. Zale did not waste a moment. He turned from the dead hero and began the grim, sacred work of saving Gideon while simultaneously preparing to harvest the precious genocide from Marius's cooling body. The Brotherhood was eroding, replaced by a cold, desperate pragmatism. They were no longer just warriors. They were becoming their own scavengers, picking over the bones of their fallen to ensure the pack survived for one more day. The slow, insidious poison of their damnation was beginning to work its way into their souls. The strain of the constant flight, the scarcity of resources, and the agony of betrayal began to eat away at the final bond holding the White Sentinels together, their brotherhood. In the dark, cold corridors of the Argent Blade, the stoic silence of the first few days had been replaced by bitter arguments and suspicious glances. The chapter was no longer a monolith. Factions born of desperation began to form around differing visions of a future none of them had ever wanted. The first faction coalesced around Captain Alaric of the 7th Company, a warrior of unshakable faith and a heart that remained painfully loyal. They were known in whispers as the Redeemers. Alaric, his face a mask of grim determination, and his eyes still burning with the fire of honor, believed their current state was a terrible trial from the Emperor, a test of their devotion to its absolute limit. In a corner of the main cargo bay, now serving as a makeshift chapter hall, Alaric spoke to his followers. His voice was resonant, a desperate appeal to a lost glory. "Brothers, we are cast out, but we are not lost," he declared, his power fist clenching. "We cannot answer error with sin. We cannot become the monsters they have named us. Our loyalty is not to the faceless lords of terror or a paranoid inquisitor. Our loyalty is to the Emperor, and to mankind we must prove it. We must find an unwinnable battle, an unbeatable foe of the Imperium, and throw ourselves upon that pyre. In our deaths we will write the truth of our innocence in blood. Only through sacrifice can we redeem our honor." His followers, warriors who still clung to the old oaths, nodded in agreement. They saw a path, albeit one that led to certain death, but a path with meaning. The second faction was its antithesis. It formed in the dark, oil-slicked engine rooms and arming chambers around the hulking, silent form of Tech Marine Lycurgus. He and his followers, dubbed the Avengers, had watched the holy machines of war, relics they had tended for centuries, be destroyed by the very people they were sworn to protect. For Lycurgus' faith was dead. Only iron and retribution remained. "Honor," Lycurgus growled to a gathering of Tech Marines and grim-faced Terminator veterans, his voice a mechanical rasp from his Vox grill. "The Imperium took our honor and used it to wipe the mud from its boots. This is not a trial. It is a betrayal. The system we bled for is rotten to the core. It is a machine that consumes its most loyal sons. To have faith in it is madness." He held up a bionic arm, its metallic fingers flexing. "I have no more faith in gods or spirits. I have faith in plasma and adamantium. The Imperium has hunted us like beasts, so we shall become beasts. We will take what we need. We will prey on the weak. We will show them the fury of the cast out. Our only loyalty is to survival, and our only future is vengeance." Between these two growing factions stood Chapter Master Theron Tyrannus, a man being torn apart. He stood on the command bridge, listening to the reports of growing dissent. The honor of an Astartes was ingrained in his very bones. Every word Alaric spoke resonated with the oaths he had lived his entire life by. And yet the brutal reality of their situation, the dying ships, the dwindling genocide, the relentless hunt, made the cold logic of Lycurgus terrifyingly compelling. He tried to hold the chapter together, appealing for discipline and patience, but he could see the fractures widening. In the long nights spent drifting between the stars, he was haunted. Should he lead his remaining sons to a glorious death to prove a point no one might ever acknowledge? Or should he abandon every principle he had ever held dear to ensure their survival no matter the cost to their souls. His internal torment mirrored the schism in the chapter itself. The White Sentinels were on the brink of a civil war, not of bolter and chainsword, but of will and ideology. And into this turmoil and despair, a third voice, an ancient and insidious one, was beginning to find its way to their most vulnerable minds. Their flight was blind, a series of desperate plunges into the chaotic hellscape of the warp. Each translation was a violent ordeal that strained the very fabric of their ships and the sanity of their mortal crews. But for the chapter's librarians, it was a unique and personal torture. Cut off from the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon, their minds were adrift in an ocean of raw, unfiltered emotion and malevolent consciousness. The veil between reality and the immaterium grew thinner with every jump. In the librarium of the Argent Blade, now a dark, cold chamber where data slates flickered with error runes. Chief Librarian Astoricus and his brothers fought a battle no one else could see. Their psychic hoods hummed and sparked, overloaded with the effort of shielding the fleet. They were the last bastion against the horrors that pressed in from all sides, and they were failing. Visions and nightmares plagued them. One Lexicanium recoiled from a scrying mirror, his face pale with terror after seeing a 9-headed serpent made of shifting colors uncoil within its depths. Another sat in a trance, his hands clamped over his ears, trying to block out the seductive whispers that promised him the knowledge to navigate the stars without a navigator. They were not the guttural roars of demons they had been trained to fight, but calm, rational voices that spoke of their pain, acknowledged their betrayal, and offered solutions. Astoricus, his face gaunt and his eyes sunken and bloodshot, sought out the chapter master. He found Theron in the ship's chapel, kneeling before the desecrated altar where the Aquila had been covered. Lord Master Astoricus began, his voice a ragged whisper. "Our wards are failing. The Imperium, it is no longer a blind storm. It is aware of us. It feels our despair. It calls to my brothers, offering them power, offering them escape, offering them revenge." Theron rose, his towering form seeming to shrink under an invisible weight. "Lies of the arch-enemy. Your training has prepared you for this. Steel your minds, recite the litanies of shielding. We are," Astoricus insisted, a note of desperation in his voice. But the litanies grow weaker with every recitation. The whispers are not just targeting our weaknesses, my lord. They are targeting our hope. They are offering us exactly what we need. It is a temptation of terrible power. The full weight of that temptation would fall upon a single soul. Librarian Kylus was a younger member of the Librarius, known for his talent, but also his impatience. He saw the chapter tearing itself apart, the Redeemers and the Avengers circling each other like starving wolves. He saw the dwindling supplies, the dying ship, and felt the hopelessness like a physical shroud. He could not stand it. In the solitude of his meditation chamber, he decided to commit a profound heresy. He would cast his mind deep into the warp, without the proper rites, without the litanies of protection, seeking not to fight the storm, but to ask it for a path. He knelt in the center of a circle of psychic relays, closed his eyes, and plunged his consciousness into the sea of souls. The backlash was instantaneous and overwhelming. He was assaulted by a hurricane of rage, fear, and lust. He saw impossible geometries and heard the screams of a billion dying souls. He was about to be torn apart, his mind shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. Then, through the cacophony, a single voice emerged. It was not a scream or a roar. It was impossibly calm, impossibly articulate, like a crystal chime in the heart of a supernova. It spoke in a language of pure logic and shifting syllogisms. "Your situation is untenable," the voice stated a simple fact. "To flee is to die slowly. To fight is to die quickly. To seek redemption is to die for a cause that has already forsaken you. This is a flawed equation." A vision flooded Kaelus's mind, overriding the chaos. He saw a place of refuge, a system hidden within a vast, swirling nebula of violet and gold, a storm in real space that would blind the augurs of any pursuit fleet. At its heart was a planet, a forge world from the dark age of technology, abandoned for millennia, but with its automated foundries still slumbering. He saw the Argent Blade in a vast orbital dock, its hull being repaired by silent, efficient machines. He saw the apothecaries discovering a hidden vault of pure, untainted genus seed. He saw a sanctuary, a path to survival. There is always another way, the voice whispered, its logic irrefutable. The equation can be changed. The Imperium is not the only variable. Survival is the highest truth. Seek the eye of midnight. Seek your salvation. With a strangled gasp, Kahlus was thrown back into his own body. He fell to the deck, shaking his nose, bleeding, but his eyes burned with a wild, feverish light. He hadn't found madness. He had found a miracle. He had found hope. He scrambled to his feet and ran from the chamber, his heart pounding with the certainty of his vision. He did not question the source of the prophecy. He did not consider the price of the offered salvation. He only knew that in the depths of their despair, an answer had been given. He burst onto the command bridge, interrupting a tense council between Theron Alaric and Lycurgus. "My lord," he cried, his voice triumphant. "I have seen it. I have seen the way forward. We are not damned. We are saved." Librarian Kahlus's prophecy had injected a dangerous, feverish hope into the fleet. He had given them a destination, a safe harbor called the Eye of Midnight. But it was a destination many light years away across hostile territory and requiring multiple warp jumps they could not possibly afford. Their plasma drives were running on fumes, and the ship's nutrient recyclers were producing little more than a foul-tasting slurry. Hope was not a fuel source. As they lurked in a sparse asteroid field in an unnamed system, their long-range augurs picked up a signal. It was a small merchant convoy, 3 lumbering millennia-old freighters plodding along a designated trade route, their holds likely filled with promethium ammunition and foodstuffs for some distant imperial world. They were slow, poorly armed, and an answer to the Sentinels' prayers. They were also crewed by thousands of loyal imperial citizens. The debate in the Argent Blade Strategium was the most vicious yet. "This is piracy!" Captain Alaric roared, his voice echoing in the tense chamber. His redeemers stood behind him, their postures rigid with indignation. "We are space marines, not renegades who prey on the helpless. To attack these ships is to become the very thing Valerius accused us of being. I will not be a part of it. It is better to die with our honor intact than to live as common thieves." Tech Marine Lycurgus stepped forward, his bionic eye glowing. "Honor is the luxury of the well-fed captain," he countered, his voice a cold, logical rasp. "Your honor will not refuel our engines. Your honor will not feed our neophytes. Those ships carry the means of our survival. Their crews serve an Imperium that has declared us enemies. Therefore their cargo is the spoils of a war they started. The logic is simple. We take what we need to reach the sanctuary Kahlus has foreseen." All eyes turned to Theron. This was the Rubicon. To cross it was to abandon the last vestiges of their sacred duty to protect the citizens of the Imperium. But to refuse was to condemn his entire chapter to a slow, ignominious death in the void. He looked at the faces of his men, Alaric's pained faith, Lycurgus's cold pragmatism, and the desperate hope in the eyes of Kahlus. His voice when he spoke was heavy with the weight of their imminent fall. "We will take the fuel and the supplies, but we are not murderers. Disable their communications, board their vessels, and secure the cargo. No harm is to come to the crews. We will leave them with enough to survive until they are found. We are taking a tithe for our survival, not committing a massacre. That is a line we will not cross." The attack was brutally efficient and deeply shameful. The Sentinels' ships, too damaged for a naval battle, launched boarding torpedoes that slammed into the hulls of the helpless freighters. Squads of white Sentinels, moving with a grim silence, stormed the bridges and engine rooms. The terrified crews, armed with little more than las pistols and courage, were swiftly and non-lethally subdued. There was no glory in it. One sentinel, his armor still bearing the scars from the fight against the Black Templars, found himself staring at the face of a young female cargo master, her eyes wide with a terror he had only ever seen in the enemies of mankind. He who had sworn to be her shield was now the monster in her nightmares. He turned away, his soul recoiling inside his ceramite shell. They took what they needed, stripping the freighters of their promethium and nutrient stores before retreating, leaving the ships adrift. They had what they needed to continue their journey. But the silence aboard their own fleet was heavier than before. They had not just stolen supplies, they had stolen a piece of their own souls. Their crime, however, did not go unanswered. A garbled distress call had escaped one of the freighters. As the White Sentinels prepared to leave the system, alarms blared across the Argent Blades bridge. A squadron of Imperial Navy Sword-class destroyers, fast and lethal, translated from the warp at the edge of the system, their weapons already glowing with power. They were caught. The Sentinels' ships were too slow, too damaged to outrun them. As the Navy ships closed in, all seemed lost. It was then that Lycurgus played his final desperate card. Lord Master, he voxed from the engine room. There is one other option. A relic from the Age of Strife, sealed in the deepest stasis vault of this ship. It was deemed too dangerous to ever be used. A weapon of last resort. What is it? Theron demanded, watching the enemy icons grow closer. They called it the Chronoscourge, Lycurgus replied. It does not fire a lance or a shell. It fires a paradox. It unspools time itself. Seeing no other choice between this and annihilation, Theron gave the horrific order. Unseal it. Lycurgus and his tech priests descended to the vault. The air grew unnaturally cold as the 1,000-year-old seals were broken. Inside, a machine of impossible geometry hummed with a sickly green-black energy. It was alien to their own holy technology. With chanted binary prayers to a machine god they no longer trusted, they diverted the ship's power to the forbidden device. The Chronoscourge fired. There was no beam, no explosion. Instead, a wave of visible distortion, like a heat haze in reality itself, shot out towards the Imperial squadron. The lead destroyer was caught in its full effect. In the space of 3 seconds, the Sentinels watched in horror as the ship rusted, decayed, and crumbled into a cloud of ancient dust, its crew aging and dying in an instant. Another ship was caught in the edge of the wave and became trapped in a time loop, its own lance blasts firing over and over, striking and destroying itself. The remaining Imperial ships, their captains screaming in terror over the Vox, broke formation and fled. The Sentinels were saved. But the price was immediate. In the engine room, the tech marines who had operated the weapon screamed as the temporal energies washed back over them. Their flesh and armor fused with the infernal machine, their bodies contorting into mockeries of man and metal. Their minds were shattered, their screams turning to a babble of binary code and forgotten dead languages. They had won their escape, but they had paid for it with forbidden knowledge and the souls of their brothers. This act was not one of desperate theft. It was a true and undeniable act of heresy. The acts of piracy and the use of forbidden technology had created a deep wound in the chapter's soul. Captain Alaric and his redeemers could bear it no longer. He strode onto the command bridge of the Argent Blade, his face a mask of righteous fury, and threw a data slate onto the hololithic projector. A crude, monstrous shape appeared, a space hulk of immense size, bristling with orc weaponry. The Godbreaker Alaric announced, his voice ringing with purpose. Our long-range augurs just detected it. It will enter the Agrippina sector in 3 weeks. The Imperial Navy has no fleets in interception range. Billions will die. This is it. This is our chance. Lycurgus scoffed from his station, the sound a crackle of static. A chance for what? A glorious death. We throw away our lives and our ships for an Imperium that spits on our name, while Caelus's sanctuary awaits us. It is sentimental madness. It is our duty, Alaric shot back, turning on the tech marine. It is the oath we swore. I would rather die as a space marine defending the helpless than live as a scavenger hiding in the dark. We will attack this monstrosity, and we will broadcast our deeds on every channel. We will force them to see our loyalty. Let our sacrifice be our testimony." The two factions stood on the verge of open conflict. Theron Tyrannus, his heart a battlefield of honor and despair, looked from one captain to the other. Alaric offered a path to a clean death, a reclamation of their stolen honor. Lycurgus offered a path to survival, but at what cost? In that moment, the weight of their damnation felt too heavy to bear. He made a choice. He would gamble the soul of his chapter on one final act of faith. "We are Astartes," Theron declared, his voice cutting through the tension. "Our purpose has not changed, even if our status has. We will not allow billions to perish while we have the strength to act. We will face the greenskin. All ships are to make ready for battle." As their battered fleet burned towards the Orc hulk, they began broadcasting a single uncoded message into the void. "This is the battle barge Argent Blade, formerly of the White Sentinels chapter. We are engaging Orc Space Hulk Godbreaker at coordinates grid Epsilon 9. The vessel poses an existential threat to the Agrippina sector. We are inflicting damage but require immediate assistance. We fight and die in the name of the Emperor of Mankind." The battle was a masterpiece of desperation. The Sentinels, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with the skill and courage of legends. The Argent Blade drew the Hulk's main fire, while the faster strike cruiser Alaric's Honor's Fist surgically destroyed its engine clusters. They were winning, but the cost was horrific. Their ships were being torn apart. Then a flicker of hope. A signal was received. Fleet approaching. "Imperial transponders," the augur officer cried out. On the tactical display, a dozen friendly icons appeared, translating from the warp. A fleet from the Imperial Fists, the stoic Sons of Dawn. A wave of triumphant relief washed over Alaric's bridge. "They heard us," he roared with joyous disbelief. "They have come, our brothers have come to fight alongside us." The Imperial Fists fleet advanced, a beautiful and terrible sight in their glorious yellow livery. They closed to optimal firing range, and then their lance batteries and bombardment cannons opened fire, not just on the Space Hulk, but on the White Sentinels. Theron watched in stunned horror as Imperial torpedoes slammed into the Argent Blade's already failing shields. A cold, clear voice cut through the Vox, an official broadcast from the Imperial Fists flagship. Per Edict 734 Gamma of the Adeptus Terra, the vessels designated Excommunicate Traitoris are to be purged. All targets are hostile. The Emperor's judgment is upon you. They hadn't come to help. They had come to execute. Aboard the Honor's Fist captain, Alaric watched his salvation become his damnation. His ship was caught in a brutal crossfire, torn apart by Orc shells from one side and Imperial lances from the other. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a profound, soul-shattering anguish. The Imperium did not want his sacrifice. It did not want his loyalty. It only wanted him dead. His entire life, his entire faith had been a lie. With his bridge collapsing around him and his crew dying, he screamed a final ragged cry into the Vox, a sound of pure agony that tore at the soul of every sentinel who heard it. "If my life cannot prove my loyalty, then let my death serve my purpose for the Emperor." He seized the controls of his dying ship and aimed its prow, not at the Imperial fleet, but at the glowing heart of the Space Hulk's reactor section. The Honor's Fist plunged into the gargantuan vessel like a spear of futile sacrifice. The resulting explosion was blinding. The strike cruiser's core detonated in a flash of white, triggering a sympathetic chain reaction that tore the Godbreaker apart from the inside. A star of silent fire bloomed in the void, consuming both Orc and Astartes in a glorious, senseless funeral pyre. Alaric and his redeemers in their final act had saved billions, but the only ones who knew the truth were the ones being fired upon by their allies. On the bridge of the Argent Blade, Theron Tyrannus watched the light of his brother's hope die. The last path to redemption was gone, burned away in a fire of betrayal. All that remained was the cold, hard logic of survival and the burning, bitter taste of pure, undiluted hatred. "Emergency jump," he ordered, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Get us out of here, now." The emergency jump was a brutal, jarring transition. The Argent blade screamed back into real space, its systems failing and its hull groaning in protest. They were alone adrift in the blackness, the echoes of Alaric's final, agonized cry still haunting the Vox. The hope of redemption was not just dead. It had been murdered, executed by the very Imperium they had sought to save. The grief and shock that had plagued the chapter for months finally broke, and in its place something new and terrible began to solidify, a cold, diamond-hard certainty. Theron Tyrannus ordered the remaining survivors to assemble in the main cargo bay. The vast, cavernous space was filled with the few hundred Astartes who remained. They were a grim sight, their once pristine white armor now scarred, blackened, and in some cases still stained with the blood of their Imperial executioners. The division between Redeemer and Avenger was gone, for the Redeemers were all dead. Only the disillusioned remained. Theron stood before them on a raised gantry, his helmet off. His face, once a noble icon of command, was now a terrifying mask of cold fury. The warmth had been scoured from his eyes, leaving only chips of icy hatred. "Captain Alaric is dead." Theron's voice boomed, amplified by the bay's acoustics. It was not a voice of mourning, but of condemnation. He and the brave warriors who followed him died for a lie. They offered their lives in a final, glorious act of loyalty, and the Imperium answered their sacrifice with cannon fire. Their hope is dead. Their honor is ash. Let their fate be the final lesson for us all. He paused, his gaze sweeping over every warrior. The oaths we swore on Cathon are void. The Emperor we served is a deaf and blind god on a dead throne. The Imperium is not our home. It has declared itself our enemy. And we shall answer in kind. A low, guttural murmur of agreement went through the assembled Astartes. "Look at the man standing next to you." Theron roared, his voice rising in power. "He is your only brother now. Look at this ship. This is your only home. Our loyalty is no longer to a gilded palace on Terra. It is to each other, to our own survival. They have hunted us. They have starved us. They have murdered our brothers who begged for their forgiveness. They have taken everything from us, but they have left us our wrath." He raised a power fist the Ceramite scarred and pitted. "I swear to you now, on the memory of our dead, we will not break. We will not fade. We will endure the darkness they have cast us into. We will learn its ways. We will grow strong on the scraps they have left us. And we will return from that darkness as their judgment. We will exist and we will have our revenge." The response was not a cry of martial pride, but a roar of pure, unified hatred. It was the sound of hundreds of broken hearts cementing into a single, vengeful purpose. This declaration was immediately followed by a ritual of blasphemy. The new creed required the destruction of the old. Theron, followed by Lycurgus, and the senior warriors marched to the ship's chapel. The space, once a sanctuary of quiet reflection, was about to become a crucible of their new identity. Lycurgus, without a word, ignited a plasma cutter. He turned not to a damaged bulkhead or a piece of machinery, but to the great two-headed golden aquila that had dominated the altar. With a vicious hiss, the superheated energy tore into the holy symbol. He didn't just remove it, he melted it, rendering the symbol of the Imperium into a molten, unrecognizable lump of slag that dripped and cooled on the sacred floor. Other warriors followed his lead. They used their gauntlets to shatter the stained glass windows depicting Imperial saints. They tore down tapestries of famous Imperial victories. The symbols of their old faith were systematically, joyfully destroyed. But the most profound transformation was that of the chaplains. Origen, the same man who had wept and pleaded for them to surrender their arms in the name of faith, now stood before the defiled altar. His skull helmet seemed to gleam with a new, malevolent light. We prayed for deliverance, and our prayers went unanswered. He bellowed, his voice no longer that of a spiritual guide, but of a prophet of hate. We offered our immortal souls in service, and our service was rewarded with betrayal. The corpse god on Terra is silent, but there are other powers in the void. Ancient mighty powers who hear our cries, powers who reward strength, who answer prayers for vengeance, who offer true immortality, not a martyr's meaningless death. Let our hatred be our new prayer. Let our revenge be our new worship. He had become their first dark apostle. The faith of the White Sentinels was dead. In its place, a new terrible creed born of betrayal and watered with the blood of martyrs was beginning to take root. Their new blasphemous faith required a sanctuary. With their old home in ruins and the entire Imperium baying for their blood, they were a warband without a world. It was then that the memory of librarian Kailas's feverish prophecy returned, no longer viewed as a miracle of the Emperor, but as an invitation from a different and perhaps more welcoming power. On the bridge of the Argent Blade, the mood was electric. The ship's lumens flickered, casting shifting, unnatural shadows. Chief Librarian Astoricus stood before the hololithic projector, his eyes no longer merely human, but glowing with a faint internal witch light. The destination Kailas spoke of, the Eye of Midnight. He intoned his voice, seeming to echo from a great distance. The whispers have shown me its true location. It does not lie in the void between stars. It lies within the cicatrix maledictum, within the great wound in reality that mortals call the Eye of Terror. A hush fell over the bridge. The Eye of Terror, the home of the arch-traitor, the bastion of the lost and the damned. For 10,000 years it had been the ultimate symbol of everything they fought against. To enter it willingly was the final, unforgivable heresy. But the fear that name once inspired was gone, burned away with Alaric's pyre. All that remained was grim logic. We were cast into darkness by the light, Theron Tyrannus, said, his voice a low growl. It is only fitting we make our home within it. The Imperium has no power there. The hunters cannot follow. The whispers that guided our brother, they will be our new navigators. He turned to Astoricus. Take us in. The final jump was unlike any they had experienced before. It was not a violent, tearing plunge into chaos. It was a willing surrender, guided by the collective psychic might of the librarians who had opened their minds fully to the promises of the warp. The Argent Blade and its escorts turned towards the greatest storm in the galaxy. As they breached the veil of reality, there was no screaming resistance. Instead, it felt like a homecoming. The roar of the plasma drives was joined by a great silent chorus of 1 billion whispering voices welcoming them into the abyss. As the fleet sailed deeper into the immaterium, on a guided path toward the physical rift in space, the laws of nature began to unravel completely. The transformation was not slow or subtle. It was a violent and agonizing becoming. The very ships began to change. The cold, sterile corridors of the Argent Blade began to sweat a thin, foul-smelling ichor. Steel bulkheads warped and buckled, as if under immense heat, sometimes seeming to breathe in a slow, rhythmic pulse. The lump of molten slag on the chapel floor, once an imperial aquila, began to shift and form into a single vast, weeping eye that stared accusingly at the ceiling. The mortal crew were the first to be truly lost. Their bodies, unprotected by the psycho-indoctrination of an Astartes, were twisted into new and horrific shapes. Arms became tentacles, mouths stretched into impossible screaming maws, and flesh sloughed off to reveal shimmering raw energy beneath. Their tormented shrieks echoed through the lower decks for a time, before they were silenced by the methodical bolt pistol fire of their former masters. Then the changes began to afflict the Astartes themselves. It was not a gift, but an agony. A warrior screamed as the tubes and cabling of his power armor's rebreather burrowed into his throat, fusing with his flesh and becoming a permanent part of his anatomy. Another watched in horror as the script of his oaths of moment tattooed on his arm began to writhe like serpents rewriting themselves into blasphemous runes that burned with a cold purple light. On the bridge, the iron halo above a captain's backpack began to spin of its own accord, whispering forgotten secrets directly into his mind. Theron stood on the command deck watching the main view screen. It no longer showed the abstract colors of the warp, but a swirling vortex of leering faces grasping claws and promises of infinite power. He felt a searing, white-hot pain in his own arm. He looked down and saw the metal of his power fist melting like hot wax, flowing over his gauntlet and fusing directly with his knuckles, the cold iron and warm flesh becoming one terrible new weapon. The pain was excruciating a fire in his very soul. But through the agony, he felt a surge of raw, intoxicating power, unlike anything he had ever known. They were no longer merely traveling to the Eye of Terror. They were being unmade and remade by it. Their journey was over. Their damnation had just begun. Their arrival in the Eye of Terror was not an arrival at all. It was a birth violent and screaming. The warp, having welcomed and remade them, spat their fleet out into the tortured reality of a demon world. Their ships, already twisted into parodies of their former glory, were torn from the Imperium and slammed onto the planet's surface, carving great smoking furrows into a landscape of living nightmare. They had crashed upon a world where physics was a dying whisper and madness was the air they breathed. The sky was a bruised purple ceiling that wept tears of blood. Mountains formed from black, glassy obsidian were carved with the likeness of screaming faces, their silent agony, a constant chorus in the background of the mind. Rivers of molten souls flowed through canyons of shifting bone, and the very ground shuddered with the planet's tormented dreams. This was Sicarus, a jewel in the crown of the ruinous powers. This was their new home. Survival here was a constant, brutal war. The native life was a legion of horrors. Packs of fleshhounds of Khorne hunted them across the blasted plains, while flocks of shrieking Tzeentchian demons assailed them from the bleeding skies. Worse still were the other inhabitants scavenging war bands of gibbering mutants and rival Chaos Marines who saw the newcomers as fresh prey. The Morning Legion, as they were not yet known, fought with the ferocity of cornered animals. They carved out a territory around the wreckage of the Argent Blade, turning their crashed vessel into a jagged, blasphemous fortress. Every day was a battle, every victory paid for in blood and ammunition, every moment a struggle against the very reality of the world that sought to consume them. This new existence was a crucible burning away the last remnants of their imperial discipline and forging them into something harder, crueler, and more attuned to the symphony of chaos that surrounded them. Theron, his fused power fist now ending in jagged metallic talons, knew that to merely survive was not enough. To thrive here, to build the strength they needed for their promised revenge, they had to stop fighting the power of this realm and start embracing it. He gathered his surviving leadership Lycurgus, his bionic parts now intertwined with demonic circuitry. Dark Apostle Origin, his face a mask of ecstatic faith, and Chief Librarian Astoricus, whose eyes were now swirling pools of raw warp energy. "This world tests us." Theron growled, his voice now a deeper, more resonant bass. "It offers us a choice: die as the echoes of what we once were, or be reborn in its fires. I have made my choice." Guided by Origin, they began a great and terrible ritual. In the center of their wreckage fortress, they erected the tattered, torn standard of the White Sentinels. Theron, using his own monstrous hand, ripped the throat out of a captured, snarling demon beast. He let the creature's ethereal black blood pour over the ancient cloth, dousing the last symbol of their honor in the filth of their new reality. He held the dripping banner aloft for all his warriors to see. "We swore an oath to a corpse god, and he gave us only silence and betrayal," he roared. "The dark gods of this realm answer our hatred. They offer us power, We will not be the slaves of one, but the masters of all their gifts. We pledge ourselves not to Corner's mindless rage, nor Tzeentch's twisted schemes, nor Nurgle's foul decay, nor Slaanesh's vile excess. We pledge ourselves to the path of chaos itself, to the long war. Our hatred will be our guide, and their power will be our weapon. Let the galaxy burn." His warriors roared their approval, a promise of eternal vengeance that shook the screaming mountains. With their new oath sworn, their old identity was a final, lingering poison. It had to be purged. "The White Sentinels are dead," Theron declared. "They died on Chthon. They died in the void with Alaric and his foolish hope. We are their sorrow. We are the pain of their betrayal made manifest. We are their unending grief. From this day forward, we are the Mourning Legion." The final ritual began. One by one, the warriors came forward to a great pit filled with a mixture of demonic ichor, black promethium soot, and the blood of their enemies. They dipped their hands, their brushes, their gauntlets into the foul mixture and began to paint over their history. The noble silver and white of their ancestral colors disappeared beneath a brutal, jagged coat of funereal black. They smeared their pauldrons and helmets with visceral streaks of blood red, a symbol of their bloody birth and their vengeful purpose. They were no longer fallen heroes. They were monsters by choice. Reforged in the fires of hell, baptized in the blood of demons, the Mourning Legion was born, and their first act would be to bring their sorrow to the galaxy that had forsaken them. Years passed in the Eye of Terror, a period of time that had no meaning in a realm where past, present, and future bled into one another. The Mourning Legion grew strong, hardened by the constant warfare of their demon world and blessed with the profane gifts of the ruinous powers. Their ships were repaired not with plasteel and adamantium, but with warp-forged iron and screaming captured souls. Their numbers were bolstered by recruiting other renegades and outcasts who had sought refuge in the Eye. They were no longer fugitives. They were a force of vengeance waiting for the opportune moment. That moment came when their sorcerers, peering into the tortured currents of the warp, found a path back into real space, a path that led them to the vulnerable heart of a system they knew well. In the strategium of the Argent Blade, now a chamber of shifting walls and screaming metal faces, a shimmering, unstable image of a planet appeared. It was a world of breathtaking beauty, covered in continent-spanning cathedrals and golden spires. "Sanctia Magna, Dark Apostle." Origin hissed, his voice filled with venomous glee. "A shrine world. 1 billion pilgrims journey there every year to grovel before the icons of their silent god. They live in blissful ignorance, protected by a token defense force. Their faith is their only shield. Then we shall show them how easily such a shield is broken," Theron Tyrannus declared. He was a changed being, larger and more terrible than the man who had been cast out. His armor was fused to his flesh, and a pair of cruel, sweeping horns had grown from his helmet, framing a face of cold, aristocratic cruelty. "They damned us in the name of their emperor. We will begin our reply by tearing down his temples and silencing the prayers of his flock. Sanctia Magna will be the first world to hear our lament." The Mourning Legion tore out of the warp, not in the silent void of deep space, but in the crowded high orbit of Sanctia Magna, a blasphemous, violent arrival that shattered the sky itself. Their ships, once the clean silver and white of imperial design, were now jagged black and crimson beasts that dripped with the corruption of the Imperium. The sight alone caused mass panic, a wave of terror that was a pleasing psychic appetizer to the beings that now inhabited the fleet. The assault was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Drop pods now resembling iron meteors covered in screaming faces slammed into the great pilgrimage plazas. From them poured not noble Astartes, but howling reavers, their bolters spitting death, and their chainswords roaring a litany of hate. Their newfound power was unleashed in its full, terrifying glory. The sorcerers of the Legion summoned storms of pink and blue warp fire that twisted the bodies of the Planetary Defense Force soldiers into screaming, glassy statues. Dark Apostle Origin led a charge against the Grand Cathedral of the Emperor's Ascension, a chorus of demonic entities swirling around him, tearing into the ranks of the faithful with unnatural glee. The Mourning Legion was merciless. They were not there to conquer, but to punish. They slaughtered the terrified ecclesiarchy priests, the outmatched PDF troopers, and the fleeing, praying pilgrims with the same cold, indiscriminate fury. They tore down statues of imperial saints and heroes, using their new monstrous strength to pull down tons of marble and gold. This was not war. This was an act of pure symbolic hatred. In the ruins of the planetary governor's palace, Theron cornered the last pocket of organized resistance. They were led by a young, defiant Imperial Guard captain, her face smeared with soot and her crimson sash torn, but her eyes burning with the same unshakable faith he himself had once possessed. She stood her ground before the towering demonic demigod her last pistol held steady. In the Emperor's name, monster, she yelled, her voice clear and unbroken, despite the carnage around her. You will not have this world, the Imperium will answer this. For a single fleeting heartbeat, Theron hesitated. He saw in her a perfect reflection of his own past, a ghost of the honor he had lost. He saw the symbol of the very people he had once bled to protect. The whispers of the gods in his mind fell silent, waiting to see what he would do. His lips peeled back in a humorless snarl. The Emperor is a lie, he growled, his voice a distorted parody of his old command tone, the sound of grinding metal and ancient fury. And his name has no power here. He did not honor her with a swift bolt round or a clean death. He raised his monstrous talon-tipped fist, the same hand that had once held aloft the banner of the White Sentinels, and brought it down upon her. The blow was absolute, an act of such brutal, overwhelming violence that it erased her from existence. As he turned away from the red stain on the broken marble, he knew the last ghost of Theron Tyrannus, the loyal chapter master, had been well and truly exorcised. All that remained was the Chaos Lord of the Mourning Legion. The Mourning Legion returned to the Eye of Terror, drenched in the psychic afterglow of a billion murdered prayers. Their first raid was a resounding success, and they celebrated in the vaulted, corrupted halls of the Argent Blade. But their victory was a feast that attracted jealous patrons. The Chaos Gods, having witnessed their potential, now sought to claim their favored champions. The unity of pure hatred that Theron had forged was about to be fractured by the far older and far more insidious rivalries of the gods themselves. The change began subtly. Warriors who had displayed the most berserker fury in the fighting on Sanctia Magna found their black armor taking on a brassy, blood-like sheen. Their minds, once filled with cold thoughts of revenge, now burned with a simple, all-consuming desire for skulls and slaughter. They began to gather in fighting pits, their chainswords roaring, not in training, but in deadly earnest. Khorne had marked them as his own. The sorcerers who had summoned the most potent warp fire found their flesh shifting, rippling as if their bodies were mere suggestions. Their minds raced with 1,000 intricate and contradictory plots, and they began whispering secrets to one another in a clicking bird-like tongue. Tzeentch had claimed his new puppets. Even amidst the Legion, new cliques formed, some warriors exulting in the sensory overload of battle, and the screams of their victims began decorating their armor with garish colors and sonic weapons. Others, stoic and grim, found a strange resilience to the plagues and contagions of the demon worlds. They visited their armor, weeping a foul but strangely protective slime. The great powers were dividing their prize. The old brotherhood was now utterly dead, replaced by a brutal shifting hierarchy of strength and divine favor. Champions of Khorne would challenge sorcerers of Tzeentch in the ship's corridors, their duels to the death a form of violent debate. Assassinations became common, a way to curry favor with a jealous patron god by eliminating the champion of another. The Morning Legion was no longer a brotherhood of the damned. It was a viper's nest of ambitious demigod murderers. At the heart of this storm sat Theron Tyrannus, the Chaos Lord of the Morning Legion. His throne, built from the fused wreckage of the Aegis of Hope's command chair and the bones of demons, was a lonely and dangerous perch. As a champion of chaos undivided, he had to balance the warring cults within his own ranks, playing their ambitions against each other. He was no longer a commander leading his brothers. He was a warlord, constantly reasserting his dominance over a pack of monsters. Challenges were frequent. A hulking warrior, his eyes burning with Cornate rage and his body swollen with newfound power, once stormed the bridge and challenged Theron for leadership. Theron did not reason with him. He did not give a speech. He simply rose from his throne and with terrifying speed and precision dismembered the challenger with his demonic talons, leaving his broken body on the deck as a warning to any other aspirants. This was his existence now, a constant bloody struggle to maintain control. In the rare moments of quiet between raids and power struggles, the ghosts of his past would visit him. He would catch a glimpse of his own uncorrupted face in the reflection of a polished black pauldron and feel a pang of something he no longer had a name for. He heard the echoes of his own voice speaking of honor and duty, a language he barely understood anymore. The gods whispered promises of infinite power, of galactic conquest, of immortality. And he had it all. But he was a slave to the whispers in his mind, a slave to the ambitions of his followers, and a slave to the unending need to prove his strength, lest he be devoured by the very power he commanded. He had achieved everything they had set out to do since the death of Hope. They had survived. They were powerful. They had their revenge. But it was a hollow, cursed existence. They had traded a noble death for an eternity of war. They had sought to avenge their betrayal, and had become the very monsters they once hunted, their every action now feeding the same malevolent gods who had orchestrated their fall. They were trapped in the long war, an endless grinding conflict against an Imperium they could never destroy, fueled by a hatred they could never extinguish. A sorcerer entered the throne room, his form shimmering. "My lord," he hissed, "the Farseers of Ulthwé have foreseen a great victory for the Imperium in the Corinthian Crusade. The threads of fate are strong, but they can be rewoven. A new target, a new battle, a new slaughter." Theron looked out of the bridge's viewport at the swirling madness of the Eye of Terror. They were immortal now. Their damnation was eternal. And the war was all there was. In the war-torn space of the Corinthian Crusade, the Morning Legion descended upon the Imperial flank like a plague. Their goal was not conquest, but disruption to bleed the Imperium's war effort and offer the souls of the slain to their dark patrons. As they prepared to assault a key supply world, their augurs detected a fleet dropping from the warp on an intercept course. It was not a chapter from the history books. Their ships were pristine, their livery of brilliant cobalt blue and gold almost painfully bright in the darkness of the void. They broadcast prayers and litanies of faith with the unwavering fervor of the young. They were the Adamant Lions, a recent Primaris space marine, founding filled with zealous, unshakable conviction. They were a perfect, painful reflection of what the White Sentinels had been millennia ago, noble, fierce, and utterly certain of their righteousness. On the bridge of the Argent Blade, Theron's champions growled in anticipation of the slaughter. "They are young, my lord Lycurgus," hissed his voice, a chorus of mechanical and demonic tones. "Their pride will be their undoing. Let us gut them." No, Theron commanded a strange, cold stillness in his voice. It was not pity that moved him, nor was it a flicker of his old honor. It was a refined, patient cruelty, a desire to poison a soul before killing the body. "Hold your fire. Open a channel to their flagship. I wish to speak to their master." A connection was forced, slicing through the Adamant Lion's pious broadcasts. Theron Tyrannus, now a monstrous figure of demon flesh and warp-forged steel, stood before the comms altar. His distorted, booming voice crossed the void to the bridge of the enemy's ship, a serpent's whisper in the ear of a paladin. Chapter Master of the Adamant Lions. Theron began. I see your shining banners. I hear your naive prayers. I remember the fire of your conviction for it once burned in my own heart. You are a beautiful, deadly weapon aimed by a hand that does not care for you. He let the words sink in before continuing. You serve a lie. The Imperium you bleed for is a corrupt, ungrateful machine that devours its children. We were once like you, celebrated, honored, loyal to the last. And for that loyalty we were cast out, condemned without trial, and hunted by our own brothers. Look at us. We are your future. His voice dropped, becoming almost intimate, a conspirator's murmur. An inquisitor's paranoia, a high lord's convenience. That is all it will take. One day they will betray you as they betrayed us. Do not die for their lies. Turn your guns with ours. The galaxy is vast, and there are powers within it that reward strength, not blind obedience. Join us. On the pristine bridge of the Lion's Pride, the young chapter master listened, his handsome face, a mask of disbelief that slowly hardened into pure, undiluted fury. Theron's words were the ultimate heresy, a temptation that was also a mortal insult. Your words are poison, arch-traitor! The young master's voice shot back, filled with the absolute certainty of youth. We are nothing like you. Our faith is our shield, and it will never falter. Your very existence is a blasphemy that stains this system, and we are the righteous fire that will purge you, clean for the Emperor. The channel cut out. A moment later, brilliant lances of pure energy erupted from the adamant Lion's fleet, striking the hull of the Argent Blade and the other corrupted vessels. Theron watched the impacts, the explosions of his own ship's flesh metal, and he did not rage. He did not even frown. A low, rumbling chuckle escaped his vox grill, a sound of bitter, ancient amusement. The cycle was so predictable, so tragic, so be it. He growled, a flicker of what might have been sorrow in his monstrous eyes. Let the lesson begin. He gave the command to return fire. The corrupted guns of the Morning Legion answered, spewing forth shells of hate and beams of raw warp energy. The two fleets closed the distance, one a shining beacon of false hope, the other a jagged embodiment of betrayed truth. As the first explosions of the new battle bloomed like dying stars between them, the tragic loop began again. The echoes of loyalty, betrayal, and damnation reverberated across the void, ready to claim a new generation of faithful souls. The narrator's voice returns, the same one from the beginning of the tale. The deep, resonant tone is still there, but the reverence it once held for the name, White Sentinels, is gone. It has been replaced by a profound, ancient weariness, the voice of one who has seen too many cycles of hope and damnation to hold on to any illusions of glory. Narrator. And so the battle rages, a fresh scar on the tormented skin of the galaxy. It matters little who wins or loses in the void between those fleets. The victory is already chaos's. A new seed of doubt has been planted in the hearts of the adamant lions, a seed that may one day bloom into a similar tragic flower. And the Morning Legion moves on, their hatred fed, their purpose renewed, their damnation absolute. Look upon them now. See these twisted vessels, these once noble ships now plated in screaming agony and blasphemous runes. See the warriors within their bodies and souls warped by the very power they sought to defy, remade into the image of the monsters they once hunted. They are a terror in the void, a name whispered in fear on 1,000 worlds. They are reavers, murderers, demon worshippers, and the sworn enemies of all that is righteous. They have become everything they were once falsely accused of being. This is the story of the Morning Legion, but it is not a simple tale of heroes who fell from grace. To say they were corrupted is to miss the terrible fundamental truth of the Imperium they served. Their damnation was not a choice made in a single moment of weakness. It was a sentence passed down by the very system they died to protect. They were condemned not for their failures, but for their virtues. They were declared traitor not for a lack of faith, but for an abundance of honor. In a moment that demanded a monstrous choice, they chose to uphold their most sacred duty, the protection of the innocent, and for that they were excommunicated. Their fall was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of a galaxy-spanning regime that has become a victim of its own oppressive, soul-crushing weight. The true architects of their fall were not the demons that whispered from the warp, but the men who sat on golden thrones and ivory towers far from the front lines. It was the paranoia of Inquisitor Valerius, the bureaucratic indifference of the High Lords of Terror, the blind, zealous fury of the Black Templars. The Imperium's own mechanisms of control, its inflexible dogma, its terror of the unknown, its readiness to sacrifice its most loyal servants for the sake of expediency, are the most effective recruiting sergeants the ruinous powers have ever known. In the grim darkness of the far future, the line between a hero and a heretic is a razor's edge thinner than a breath of faith. To be a hero is to serve. To be a heretic is to question. The White Sentinels questioned a single order, and in doing so, they sealed their fate. They learned the galaxy's cruelest lesson, that in the service of the Imperium, there is no innocence, only differing degrees of guilt. There is no reward for loyalty, only punishment for the slightest deviation. And so they sail on an eternal scar on the history of the Imperium. They are a legend, a ghost story told to frighten new recruits, a cautionary tale of what happens to those who stray. They have their immortality, their power, their endless war. They have become one more screaming voice in the great, terrible chorus of the lost and the damned. They fight on forever, trapped in a war they did not start, but now cannot end against a home they can never reclaim, but can never stop hating. Their battle cries are no longer the proud declarations of the Emperor's chosen, but the sorrowful, furious echoes of betrayed loyalty, a symphony of ash and sorrow that will ring out amongst the uncaring stars until the end of time itself.